Every Fallout game opens with the same 4 words: war, war never changes. But the games themselves couldn't be more different from each other. Some are genre-defining RPGs that reshaped what player choice could mean. Others are catastrophic misfires that nearly destroyed the franchise overnight. And at least one is so aggressively bad that the entire community has collectively agreed it never happened. So when you try to explain and rank every Fallout game from worst to best, you realize pretty quickly that this franchise is just as messy and unpredictable as the wastelands it creates. This is why today, we're bringing you every Fallout game explained and ranked in 40 minutes. I replayed all of them to build this list. Some of them were an absolute joy to revisit. Others made me question my life choices. But I'm committed to the bit, so let's sort through the wreckage, starting at rock bottom. Fallout, Brotherhood of Steel. The one we don't talk about. Every franchise has that one cursed entry the fans refuse to acknowledge. Star Wars has the Holiday Special, Zelda has the CDI games, and Fallout has Brotherhood of Steel. Released in 2004 for the PS2 and Xbox, this was Interplay's final desperate gasp, a last-ditch grab for cash using the Fallout name before the company imploded. And honestly, looking at what they produced, maybe it should have imploded sooner. Brotherhood of Steel is a top-down hack-and-slash action game that plays more like a budget Baldur's Gate, Dark Alliance knockoff than anything resembling the franchise it's attached to. You pick from 3 characters: Kane, a Brotherhood initiate, Nadia, a hardened wastelander, or Cyrus, a walking slab of meat with the personality of drywall, and you hack, slash, and shoot your way through a plot so thin you could read a newspaper through it. The journey drags you from the small settlement of Carbon, Texas, through the ruins of post-apocalyptic Los Angeles, and into a secret vault that Vault-Tec apparently built without anyone in the main series ever mentioning it. Because sure, that tracks. A super mutant leader named Addis is hunting this secret vault for its FEV research to perfect his mutant army. You fight through wave after identical wave of raiders, rad scorpions, and ghouls until you finally face Addis inside the vault. He merges with a massive FEV vat and transforms into a fleshy blob monster because subtlety was never on the table, and you blow everything sky high. Roll credits. That's it. That's the whole thing. And look, I could forgive a spin-off for trying something different. Experimentation isn't a crime, but Brotherhood of Steel doesn't just fail as a Fallout game, it fails as a game. Full stop. The combat is mind-numbingly repetitive. The level design feels procedurally generated by someone who gave up halfway. The writing hovers somewhere between generic action script and written during a building evacuation. There's a Balls Guarana energy drink that appears as an actual in-game health item, a real-world product placement sitting right there in your Fallout inventory. That's about as immersive as finding a Subway sandwich wrapper in Skyrim. The soundtrack features heavy metal from Slipknot and Killswitch Engage, which fits the retro-futuristic Fallout aesthetic about as well as a tuxedo fits a Deathclaw. There are no meaningful choices, no branching paths, no dialogue that matters. You walk forward, hit things, collect some loot, and repeat until the game mercifully ends. For a franchise built entirely on player agency, moral complexity, and consequences that ripple through entire worlds, Brotherhood of Steel is the equivalent of Vault-Tec locking you in an empty room and calling it an experiment. So when I'm putting every Fallout game in order from worst to best, this one doesn't just sit at the bottom, it digs a hole beneath the bottom and buries itself. Dead last, number 8 out of 8. Number 8 out of the only Fallout game I'd genuinely tell you to never play. If it vanished from existence tomorrow, the franchise would be objectively better for it. But here's what makes ranking these games interesting. Being the absolute worst doesn't mean everything above it is automatically good, because the next game on this list launched so catastrophically that it nearly did something Brotherhood of Steel couldn't. It almost made millions of people stop caring about Fallout entirely. Fallout 76, The Apocalypse. Nobody asked for you. You know that feeling when a friend invites you to a party and you show up excited only to find no food, no music, and the host left an hour ago. That's essentially what booting up Fallout 76 on launch day in November 2018 felt like. Bethesda took a franchise defined by rich, single-player storytelling and said, what if we made it an always-online multiplayer experience with no human NPCs? Bold decision. Let's see how the Wasteland rewarded that confidence. Fallout 76 is set in Appalachia, post-apocalyptic West Virginia, and you play as a Vault 76 resident emerging on Reclamation Day, just 25 years after the Great War. The premise sounded incredible on paper. Explore a massive, gorgeous open world alongside friends and rebuild civilization together. The problem was that at launch, the world was completely hollow. Every quest giver was dead. Every story was delivered through holotapes and terminal entries scattered across a beautiful but soulless map. You were basically exploring a graveyard where the only living things were irradiated creatures trying to kill you and other confused players wandering around in their underwear, trying to figure out what they'd spent $60 on. The main storyline involved tracking the Scorched Plague, a disease spread by scorch beasts, which are essentially irradiated bat dragons pulled from a developer's stress nightmare, and eventually nuking a Fisher site to kill the Scorch Beast Queen. It was coherent. It technically functioned as a narrative. It was also about as emotionally engaging as reading the instructions on a bottle of shampoo. Without actual characters to connect with, every mission felt like homework assigned by a ghost who died before finishing the lesson plan. So what were you actually doing? Picking up holotapes from dead people and reading terminals like the world's saddest IT technician? And then there were the bugs. Not the Radroach kind. The kind where your power armor would consume your character model whole, your CAMP would phase into another dimension, and the servers would crash with the reliability of a vertibird in literally any Bethesda game. The launch wasn't just rough. It was the kind of catastrophe that generates apology videos. But here's where Fallout 76's story stops being a punchline and starts getting genuinely interesting. Bethesda didn't walk away. The Wastelanders update in April 2020 added human NPCs, real dialogue trees, faction reputation, and actual characters you could care about. Steel Dawn and Steel Rain brought the Brotherhood of Steel to Appalachia, with storylines that had real moral weight. Nuka World on tour dropped a traveling carnival into the wasteland. Skyline Valley introduced an entirely new region with ghoul lore that legitimately enriched the franchise. Over several years, Fallout 76 underwent a transformation so dramatic it almost felt like a different game wearing the same title. So, where does that leave it in the ranking? Look, I'll be honest, 7th place, second from the bottom, and even that feels generous. I respect the comeback. I genuinely do. The development team stuck with this game when abandoning it would have been the easy call, but the fact that it took nearly 2 years of post-launch reconstruction to make 76 feel like a complete experience isn't something Goodwill patches over. It's like a restaurant that gives you food poisoning on opening night, then spends years renovating the kitchen and hiring better chefs. Sure, the food is good now, but you still remember throwing up in the parking lot. The foundation Fallout 76 was built on will always be cracked, even if the house they eventually constructed on top of it became genuinely livable. If Fallout 76 showed what happens when the franchise abandons its single-player identity, the next game tested something equally risky from the opposite direction. What happens when you strip away the RPG elements entirely and rebuild Fallout as a tactical combat game? Fallout Tactics, Brotherhood of Steel, the franchise in disguise before anyone panics. No, this is not the same Brotherhood of Steel we just buried at number 8. Fallout Tactics. Brotherhood of Steel, released in 2001 by Micro Forte, is a completely different game. And unlike its cursed console cousin, Tactics is actually not terrible, controversial, absolutely. A beloved classic, not by any stretch, but genuinely competent at what it does. Whether what it does qualifies as Fallout is the real debate. Tactics shifts the franchise from its RPG roots into squad-based tactical combat. Think XCOM dropped into the post-apocalyptic Midwest. The setup follows a Brotherhood of Steel contingent whose airships get destroyed during a massive storm while heading west. The survivors crash land in the middle of nowhere, completely cut off from Brotherhood leadership, so they improvise. This splinter group establishes a new chapter, recruits from local populations, and starts carving out territory in a region no other Fallout game has touched. And here's where Brotherhood purists might want to sit down. This Midwest chapter recruits ghouls, super mutants, and deathclaws into their ranks. Yeah, if Elder Maxon from Fallout 4 could see this, his power armor would spontaneously combust from sheer ideological fury. But survival trumps purity when you're outnumbered, outgunned, and stranded 1,000 miles from anyone who shares your DNA preferences. The campaign escalates through increasingly dangerous conflicts. Raiders, beast lords who psychically control animals through some never fully explained mutation, super mutant remnants, and eventually an army of killer robots commanded by a rogue AI called the Calculator. This thing sits inside Vault Zero, a command vault designed to coordinate America's entire post-war reconstruction. Naturally, because nothing in Fallout works the way it's supposed to, the Calculator went haywire and decided pacification meant exterminating everything with a pulse. Your final choice is classic Fallout philosophy packaged in a different genre. Merge a human mind with the Calculator to seize control, or pull the plug and let the Midwest figure itself out. The tactical gameplay is genuinely satisfying if squad management is your thing. Positioning units behind cover, coordinating flanking, planning ambushes, it scratches an itch that no other Fallout game even attempts. But that's also the problem. This doesn't feel like Fallout. The emphasis is overwhelmingly on combat over dialogue choices, and the kind of role-playing that defines the series. It's like ordering pizza and receiving a really good calzone. Same basic ingredients, sure, but that's not what you ordered. And you're a little annoyed about it. Tactics also exist in weird canonical limbo. Bethesda references the Midwest Brotherhood in later games, but treats the specific story as broad strokes canon. They'll borrow what's useful and ignore the rest. So, Tactics lives in the franchise like a half-remembered dream everyone vaguely agrees happened, but nobody wants to describe in detail. Oh, and before I place Tactics in the ranking, Fallout Shelter exists. Bethesda's 2015 mobile vault management sim. It's fun for about 2 weeks. It'll drain your phone battery faster than a Fusion Core powers a desk lamp, and ranking it against full games feels like comparing a bag of chips to a 5-course dinner. Consider it acknowledged and respectfully set aside. As for Tactics itself, when I weigh it against every other game in this franchise, 6th place feels right. Lower middle of the pack. It's a competent tactical game wearing a Fallout jacket it doesn't quite fill out. If you love micromanaging squad positions and watching carefully planned ambushes unfold, there's real enjoyment here. If you came looking for rich dialogue, moral devastation, and branching consequences, you're knocking on the wrong vault door. So if Tactics revealed that stripping the RPG identity out of Fallout leaves you with a decent game in the wrong costume, the next entry on this list proves that even a full-blown mainline Bethesda release can stumble into the same trap, just from the complete opposite direction. Fallout 4. All guns. No dialogue. Here's a take that really shouldn't be controversial anymore, but somehow still starts arguments every single time. Fallout 4 is a great game. It is not a great Fallout game. And I know the difference sounds pedantic until you actually sit down and think about what this franchise is supposed to be. Because Fallout was never about gunplay. It was about the choices. And Fallout 4 built the best combat the series has ever seen, and then attached it to a dialogue wheel with 4 flavors of yes. Released November 2015, Fallout 4 drops you into the Commonwealth, post-apocalyptic Boston and surrounding Massachusetts. You play as the sole survivor, and the game opens before the bombs even fall. You're living a quiet suburban life with your spouse and infant son, Sean. Then the air raid sirens shriek. You sprint to Vault 111, and instead of shelter, you get cryogenically frozen for 210 years. You wake up just long enough to watch your spouse get murdered and your son kidnapped by a scarred stranger. Then you're refrozen. When you finally thaw for good, you crawl out into the wasteland with one purpose: find your child. It's deeply personal. It should be one of the most emotionally compelling hooks in the franchise. And it would be if the game didn't immediately hand you a workbench, some scrap wood, and a pile of desk fans and whisper, hey, maybe build a settlement first, and then another settlement needs your help, and another, and another. Before you know it, you've spent 40 hours constructing water purifiers and turrets, and you've completely forgotten you have a missing child. Father of the Year material right there. Now, here's where I'll give Fallout 4 every bit of credit it deserves, because it earns a lot. The combat is a monumental leap forward. Gunplay is tight, responsive, and satisfying enough to function as a genuine first-person shooter without ever touching VATS. Power armor feels like climbing into a walking tank for the first time in the series. The crafting and modding systems are absurdly deep. Weapons, armor, settlements, robots, all customizable to an almost obsessive degree. And the Commonwealth is packed with environmental storytelling, interesting locations, and random encounters that make aimless wandering genuinely rewarding. Mechanically, this is the most polished Fallout has ever felt. And then you try to have a conversation with someone, and everything crumbles. The voiced protagonist was Bethesda's attempt at a more cinematic RPG experience. What it actually produced was a system where every dialogue choice boils down to yes, sarcastic, yes, question that eventually becomes yes, and no, but actually yes later. Compared to the branching, consequence-heavy dialogue of previous entries, this was like ordering at a restaurant where every item on the menu is chicken. You can get it grilled, fried, baked, or seasoned. Doesn't matter, you're still eating chicken. The factions are compelling in concept. Minutemen want to rebuild through unity. The Railroad fights to liberate synths. The Brotherhood wants to annihilate synths and any dangerous technology. And the Institute, operating from beneath MIT's ruins, is somehow both the central antagonist and a joinable faction whose motivations are so poorly communicated that Mankind redefined sounds like an ad slogan that got approved before anyone wrote the actual mission statement. The twist that Father, the Institute's leader, is your son Sean, now elderly because you were frozen far longer than you realized, should be emotionally devastating. Instead, it lands with a thud because you've spent 50 hours managing settlements and answering Preston Garvey's calls for help instead of engaging with your own story. And here's what bothers me most. Can you name a single moment in Fallout 4 where a dialogue choice genuinely changed changed how you felt about the story? Because I've been trying, and I keep coming up empty. This is the part of the ranking where I probably lose some of you, because Fallout 4 lands at 5th place, dead center. And I know that stings for fans who've poured hundreds of hours into this game. I have too. That's what makes this placement frustrating and, I think, honest. Fallout 4 is a world I love exploring and a story I struggle to care about. It's an Olympic-sized pool that's only 3 feet deep. You can splash around in it forever, but don't try diving headfirst. If Fallout 4 is the entry that perfected the feel but hollowed out the soul, the next game proved those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive, that you can build a massive open world and still fill it with stories worth telling. At least one time, Bethesda got that balance closer to right. Fallout 3, a wasteland worth exploring. If you're under 30 and you love this franchise, there's a strong chance this is the game that started everything for you. And I get it completely. Because stepping out of Vault 101 for the first time, blinding light flooding your screen, the devastated ruins of Washington, D.C. slowly revealing themselves as your eyes adjust, is still one of the most iconic moments in gaming history. That single image sold an entire generation on Fallout. And that kind of first impression doesn't fade, no matter how many times you replay it. Released October 2008, Fallout 3 was Bethesda's radical reinvention of a franchise they had acquired from the crumbling remains of Interplay. Isometric, turn-based RPG becomes a fully 3D, first-person open-world experience. You play as the lone wanderer, born and raised inside Vault 101, forced to escape when your father James, voiced by Liam Neeson, because apparently the apocalypse has a casting budget, vanishes from the vault without warning, throwing the community into panic. The Capital Wasteland is, honestly, one of the best settings in the entire franchise. The desolate D.C. ruins, the skeletal Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial occupied by slavers, the Pentagon converted into the Brotherhood of Steel's citadel, it all feels genuinely oppressive, authentically bleak, and endlessly fascinating. Wandering through pitch-dark metro tunnels, catching Galaxy News radio static on your Pip-Boy while Three Dog's voice crackles in and out, stumbling across a collapsed highway overpass crawling with raiders. That's environmental storytelling done right. And Bethesda, whatever their other faults, does this better than almost anyone in the industry. The main quest follows your father's life work, Project Purity, a massive water purifier built inside the Jefferson Memorial designed to deliver clean water to the entire Capital Wasteland. The Enclave, led by President Eden, who, in classic Fallout fashion, turns out to be an AI, wants to hijack the project and contaminate the water with modified FEV to exterminate anyone carrying genetic mutations. In a post-nuclear world, that's essentially everyone who isn't Enclave. Your father sacrifices himself to keep Project Purity from their hands, and the finale has you storming the Purifier alongside Liberty Prime, a towering, patriotic, communist-obliterating robot, and activating it. How much you sacrifice personally depends on how heroic you're feeling at 3 in the morning. Fallout 3's flaws are well documented and worth being honest about. The main storyline is more linear than its predecessors. The karma system is laughably binary. Detonate an entire town and you're evil, give a beggar some water and you're apparently Gandhi. The original ending was so restrictive that fans rioted until Bethesda patched it with the Broken Steel DLC. And the writing, while serviceable, doesn't consistently reach the heights of what came before or after it. But the side content? Phenomenal. The Republic of Dave, a delusional man's tiny self-declared nation. Tranquility Lane, a virtual reality suburb hiding one of the creepiest scenarios in the series. The Superhuman Gambit, 2 wannabe superheroes battling with ants and giant scorpions in a conflict that sounds absurd until you realize it's actually kind of heartbreaking. Oasis, a secret grove led by a talking tree who turns out to be Harold, a character from the original games. These quests have personality, creativity, and emotional punch that rival anything in the franchise. The DLCs, Point Lookout's swampy horror, The Pit's moral nightmare, Broken Steel's extended campaign added real substance. And Three Dog remains one of the most beloved radio hosts in gaming. If you disagree, I'm not sure we can be friends. And that's really what Fallout 3's legacy comes down to. It didn't just bring a dead franchise back to life. It translated a deeply complex, stat-heavy, isometric RPG tradition into something accessible without completely losing the spirit of what made it special. Not perfectly, but well enough that an entire generation walked out of Vault 101 and never looked back. For my money, Fallout 3 earns the 4th spot in this ranking. I know some people would put it higher, maybe even first, and I understand that impulse because this game literally saved the franchise from irrelevance and built the template for everything that followed. But when I'm weighing the complete package, writing quality, player agency, RPG depth, replayability, 4 feels exactly right. The atmosphere and world building are irreplaceable. The main quest has plot holes you could fly a vertibird through. That combination lands it here, and I'm comfortable with that. If Fallout 3 proved that atmosphere and world building alone could make millions of people fall in love with a franchise they'd never heard of, then the game that invented every design principle Bethesda would later borrow, bend, or quietly ignore deserves to be understood on its own terms. And fair warning, it does not hold your hand. Fallout 1997, where it all began. It's 1997. You're sitting in front of a beige CRT monitor that weighs more than your future gaming PC. A narrator speaks over footage of a retro-futuristic television set, and he tells you something you're going to hear 1,000 more times across 3 decades. War. War never changes. A screen fades in. A vault door opens. And one of the most important RPGs in history quietly starts running. The original Fallout isn't just the first game in this franchise, it's the philosophical blueprint that every single entry after it has been measured against. Developed by Interplay and designed by people like Tim Kaine, this wasn't another RPG following the rules of the genre. This was a game that rewrote them, and playing it today, almost 30 years later, 2 things become immediately clear. An astonishing amount of it still holds up, and it will absolutely destroy you without mercy if you don't know what you're doing. Both of those things are features, not flaws. You play as the Vault Dweller, a resident of Vault 13 in Southern California. The Vault's water chip, the device that purifies and recycles the entire water supply, has broken. Without a replacement, everyone dies within 150 days. The Overseer selects you, presumably through a very enthusiastic game of Not It, and sends you out into the irradiated wasteland to find one. What follows is one of the most genuinely open-ended RPGs of its era, and that openness is what separates it from practically everything else released in the late 90s. You can fight through every obstacle with brute force, talk your way past nearly any confrontation with the right skills, sneak through entire areas without being detected, and if your intelligence is low enough, your character communicates almost entirely in confused grunts and stumbles through the plot like a well-meaning toddler who somehow acquired a shotgun. The game doesn't hold your hand. Don't plaster markers across your screen. It trusts you to explore, ask questions, and figure things out, which is either deeply empowering or absolutely maddening, depending on how many hours you've spent wandering the desert trying to find Necropolis without a guide. But here's the real question. When was the last time a modern RPG trusted you this much? Because in 1997, this wasn't considered a bold design. It was just design. The story evolves brilliantly from simple survival into something far more significant. After finding the water chip, you discover the real threat, the Master, a horrifying and intelligent mutant consciousness leading an army of super mutants. His plan is to forcibly evolve all of humanity using the forced evolutionary virus. But here's what elevates the Master above almost every villain in the franchise. He's not mindless. He genuinely believes he's saving the species by unifying it into something stronger, something beyond petty human war. And if your speech is high enough and you've found the right evidence, you can convince him his vision is genetically doomed. Super mutants are sterile. His utopia has no future generation. Confronted with that truth, he destroys himself. No boss fight, no final showdown, just words, logic, and the devastating realization that his entire life's work was built on a biological lie. This was 1997. That kind of design still makes most modern RPGs look timid by comparison. The ending is bittersweet in the way only great stories can be. You return to Vault 13 a hero. You saved everyone. And the Overseer exiles you anyway, because your experiences on the surface have changed you too fundamentally. You've seen too much. You know too much. Your presence threatens a community that survives specifically through ignorance. The Vault Dweller turns and walks alone into the desert. From that one image, a silhouette against an orange horizon, an entire franchise is born. So, the game that literally created everything we're talking about today, where does it actually land? Third, the bronze medal. And I realize that sounds like sacrilege to some people. How do you put the game that started this entire franchise below 2 others? Here's how. The design philosophy behind the original Fallout remains the gold standard for RPGs. True player agency, meaningful consequences, a world that treats you like an intelligent adult instead of a child who needs constant guidance. That core is brilliant and timeless, but the interface is aged. The combat can be genuinely clunky, and that original time limit gave an entire generation of gamers anxiety disorders they can still feel 27 years later. 2 games took this core and built something even larger, even deeper, and even more unforgettable on top of it. Speaking of building bigger, the sequel took that foundation and constructed an absolute mansion on top of it, complete with a mob-run casino, a government conspiracy, a talking Deathclaw, and at least one shotgun wedding. Most of of those are more literal than you'd expect. Fallout 2, 1998, The Beautiful Madness. There's a specific kind of madness that only shows up when talented people are given zero time and zero restrictions at the exact same moment. Fallout 2 is what that madness looks like when it somehow works. Released just 1 year after the original, a development timeline that would hospitalize a modern studio, it took the first game's framework, tripled the world, quadrupled the content, and cranked the humor so far past dark comedy that it blasted into its own tonal dimension. If the first Fallout was a tight, bleak, post-apocalyptic thriller, Fallout 2 is its unhinged older sibling who shows up to the family reunion with stories that are either hilarious or deeply disturbing, and almost always both at the exact same time. You play as the Chosen One, a tribal descendant of the original Vault Dweller living in the village of Arroyo. The village is dying. Crops are withering. People are falling ill. And the elders believe the only salvation is a pre-war device called the Garden of Eden Creation Kit, the GECK. So, they perform a ritual, declare you their champion, and point you toward the wasteland. What starts as a straightforward retrieval quest becomes one of the most sprawling, content-dense RPG experiences ever pressed onto a disc. The world is enormous, and every location has its own identity and moral gravity. Vault City, the sterile, self-righteous settlement that treats everyone outside its walls like a biological hazard, teaches you that civilized is often just a prettier word for authoritarian. New Reno, controlled by 4 warring crime families, lets you become a boxing champion, a porn star, a made man for the mob, or all 3 in the same playthrough if you're dedicated enough to the bit. You explore the ruins of the Mariposa military base from the first game, now haunted by remnant supermutants. You visit San Francisco, where the Shi, descendants of a Chinese submarine crew, have built a surprisingly sophisticated society blending pre-war technology with ancient tradition. Every town, every faction, every random encounter adds something to a world that feels genuinely alive, despite being set after the end of civilization. And then you find the Enclave. Operating from an oil rig off the California coast, these remnants of the pre-war United States government have spent decades hiding, planning, and perfecting a scheme that makes every raider and supermutant in the wasteland look like a minor inconvenience. Their plan? Release a modified FEV virus into the jet stream that will exterminate every genetically impure creature on the planet. Since everyone on the surface has been marinating in radiation for over 80 years, genetically impure means literally every living thing that is an Enclave. President Dick Richardson explains all of this with the calm confidence of a man presenting quarterly earnings to an approving board. He doesn't think he's a monster. He thinks he's efficient, and that's what makes him one of the most terrifying antagonists in the franchise. He believes in spreadsheets, not supervillainy. Frank Horrigan, the Enclave's final enforcer, is their exclamation point, a towering mass of mutated flesh and power armor who might be the most physically imposing antagonist the series has ever produced. The final assault on the oil rig lets you recruit allies, hack systems, sabotage operations, and even talk your way past certain confrontations. It feels earned because you spent dozens of hours building toward it. The humor is legendary and, depending on who you ask, controversial. You can stumble across the TARDIS as a random encounter. You walk into a Monty Python bridge scene. You get married against your will via shotgun-wielding father. The fourth wall doesn't just break, it gets demolished, rebuilt from scrap wood, and broken again for sport. Some fans love this because it gives Fallout 2 a personality no other game in the series has ever matched. Others argue it undercuts the tone. Personally, I think the tonal whiplash is precisely what makes this game impossible to forget. 1 minute, you're laughing at an absurd pop culture reference. The next, you're staring at a dialogue option that makes you genuinely question your own morality. That's not inconsistency. That's range. And very few games in history have had the nerve to even attempt it, let alone pull it off this well. So here's the part where the fans of this game are either going to nod or riot. When I stack every Fallout game against each other, Fallout 2 takes the second spot, the silver. And if you're screaming at your screen right now, I get it completely. This game's scope is staggering. Its writing is razor sharp. Its commitment to letting you do virtually anything, including things the developers probably never should have allowed, creates a sense of freedom that most modern RPGs are simply too cautious to try. You could play it 5 times and have 5 fundamentally different experiences each time. The only reason it doesn't claim the top is that one game took everything Fallout 2 did brilliantly, the factions, the writing, the player agency, the thematic depth, and refined it into something so focused, so polished and so relentlessly intelligent that it became the standard by which every RPG released after it has been judged. That game is sitting at the very top of this list. And if you've been paying even a little attention, you already know exactly which one it is. Fallout New Vegas. 2010. War never changes, but this game changed everything. You might think you already know why New Vegas is number one. You've probably heard the arguments 1,000 times on the writing, the factions, the DLCs, the reputation system, the fact that the internet has spent 14 consecutive years insisting it's the greatest Fallout ever made, and yeah, all of that matters. But the real reason New Vegas sits at the very top of this ranking is something simpler and infinitely harder to replicate. It trusts you completely, without reservation. More than any other Fallout game, and more than almost any RPG ever created, New Vegas hands you a world full of complex, competing, morally tangled ideologies and says, you decide, not pick a color, not choose the obviously good option or the obviously evil one. Just decide, figure it out, and then live with whatever consequences come next. Developed by Obsidian Entertainment, a studio packed with original Fallout veterans, including Josh Sawyer and Chris Avellone, New Vegas released in October 2010. It was built on Fallout 3's engine in approximately 18 months. 18 months. Let that sit for a moment. The fact that this game exists at all given that timeline is a minor miracle. The fact that it turned out this good is a major one. Full honesty though, at launch, New Vegas was buggier than a Cazador nest after someone kicked it. Crashes, broken quests, corrupted saves, NPCs sinking through floors like they were auditioning for a horror movie. The game was held together with duct tape, willpower, and the goodwill of a fanbase that could tell something extraordinary was hiding beneath the chaos. You play as the Courier, a delivery person who gets intercepted in the Mojave Desert, shot twice in the head, and left for dead in a shallow grave. Your package, a platinum poker chip, has been stolen by Benny, a slick, checkered suit-wearing chairman of the Tops Casino, voiced by Matthew Perry. You wake up in Doc Mitchell's house, he asks you some questions to establish your character, and the entire Mojave wasteland unfolds before you. And here's the structural genius that elevates New Vegas above everything else. The main story isn't really about revenge. Sure, tracking down Benny and recovering the chip is your initial motivation, but the platinum chip is a key, a MacGuffin that pulls you into the center of a four-way power struggle for control of Hoover Dam, and, by extension, the future of the entire Mojave region. The NCR, the New California Republic, wants to annex New Vegas and bring democratic governance to the wasteland. Their intentions are broadly good. Their execution is a bureaucratic catastrophe. They're overextended, riddled with corruption, struggling with internal politics, and treating the Mojave less like a community they're liberating and more like a colony they're managing. Caesar's Legion is a brutal, expansionist slave army modeled after ancient Rome. They crucify prisoners, enslave women, and rule through absolute discipline and terror. And yet, and this is where the writing becomes genuinely brilliant, Caesar himself is articulate, well-read, and charismatic enough to make you sit through his entire philosophical justification for why he's building what he's building. You might despise everything about him, but the game forces you to understand him, and that understanding is infinitely more unsettling than any one-dimensional villain screaming about world domination. Mr. House is a pre-war tech genius who literally kept New Vegas alive through the apocalypse using a massive missile defense system. He wants to run the city as a benevolent autocracy, progress through capitalism, order through centralized control. He's brilliant, pragmatic, and talks to you like you're a particularly slow intern who somehow got past security. And then there's Yes Man, the wildcard route where you seize control of New Vegas for yourself. Because sometimes the wasteland's best option is just some courier who got shot in the head and decided to become king. None of these factions are purely good. None are purely evil. The NCR will tax you dry and send your neighbors to die in a war they can't finish. The Legion will burn your community and call the ashes peace. Houses will preserve culture and technology while treating human beings as line items on a balance sheet. And the independent route gives you freedom. But freedom without structure is chaos. Because seizing power doesn't automatically mean you know what to do with it. The game never once tells you which path is correct. It presents evidence. It lets you talk to people on every side of the conflict. It shows you consequences in real time. And then it steps back. That restraint, that absolute refusal to morally handhold the player, is what separates New Vegas from from everything else in this franchise and from most RPGs ever made. The companions alone would justify this game's reputation. Every one of them is a fully realized person whose personal quest ties directly into the game's larger themes. Boone, a traumatized NCR sniper haunted by his role in the Bitter Springs massacre and the impossible choice he made to protect his wife from enslavement. Veronica, a Brotherhood of Steel scribe, watching her order rot from ideological stubbornness and refusing to abandon them even when she knows she should. Raoul, a pre-war ghoul mechanic who's survived long enough to watch every ideology he's ever believed in rise, shine, and crumble to dust. Arcade Gannon, a followers of the Apocalypse Doctor with Enclave bloodlines, desperately trying to escape the gravity of a legacy he never chose. Cass, a caravan owner drowning in whiskey and white-hot fury over the corporations that destroyed her livelihood. These aren't combat accessories you drag through the desert, they're lenses through which you see the world differently. Losing any of them actually hurts. And the DLCs. These 4 expansions could fill an entire video on their own, but even briefly. Dead Money traps you inside the legendary Sierra Madre Casino for a survival horror experience that's really about learning to let go of obsession, greed, and the ghosts of the past. Honest Hearts takes you to Zion National Park and explores faith, cultural preservation, and the legacy of Joshua Graham, the burned man, one of the most compelling characters in the franchise who appears for barely a few hours and leaves a permanent mark. Old World Blues drops you into the Big Mountain research crater for sci-fi comedy that's simultaneously hilarious, deeply unsettling, and surprisingly emotional. And Lonesome Road is the Courier's final reckoning, a confrontation with Ulysses, a man who's been watching you from the shadows, holding you responsible for the destruction of an entire community you don't even remember delivering a package to. Together, these 4 DLCs form a thematic arc about the seductive, destructive pull of clinging to old-world ideals. And they elevate an already exceptional game into something that genuinely approaches literature. I want to be honest with you. When I started building this list, I went back to every Fallout game trying to be fair. I genuinely wanted to challenge whether I'd been overrating New Vegas in my memory. Maybe replaying it would reveal cracks I'd been ignoring for years. But it didn't. If anything, experiencing every other game first made me appreciate New Vegas even more by contrast. This game was built in 18 months on a borrowed engine by a studio given an impossible deadline, underpaid by a bonus structure that famously punished them for missing a Metacritic threshold by a single point. And despite every obstacle imaginable, they created a world so rich, so reactive, so impeccably written, and so fundamentally respectful of the player's intelligence that 14 years later, people are still passionately arguing about which faction truly deserved Hoover Dam, and the game is still refusing to tell them. That's not just good design, that's legacy. That's the kind of achievement you measure everything else against, and almost everything comes up short. The best Fallout game ever made, and honestly, it was never really close. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the most disturbing Fallout mods explained, click on the video on the screen.